right. Keith one-time Thurman is back and back at it big after his fight in Australia with Garvis. And it looks like we may have some real big barn burner fights coming up soon as one of the best welterweights of this century made his return. Let's talk about that and the fact that he called out Tim Tszyu. But I don't care about Tim Tszyu. I care about Errol Spence Jr. Let's talk about that in this video. I've been patiently waiting for the return of one of my favorite fighters, Keith one-time Thurman out of Florida, who made his professional return after almost 3 years out of the ring against Garvis from Sydney, Australia. Keith Thurman looked like one time once again as he gets a third-round knockout and a series of knockdowns of this young potential contender in Australia. Showed his speed, showed his level, changing up angles on this guy, super sharp punches, looked like his punching power was all the way back. So maybe, the hand injury that he had been complaining about for a lot of years looked like it worked itself out, looked like he was able to throw with full force. And a Keith Thurman that is able to throw with full force is trouble for anybody he gets in the ring with. Now, of course, people are going to point out the fact that, okay, it's only Garvis. It doesn't really mean that much. So what? Keith Thurman is done, blah, 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 blah. Like I said, when I was talking with Kamal Oz on our live stream, shout out to Kamal Oz. Kamal Oz made a great point. And he said, look, boxing needs Keith Thurman. There's almost nobody in the game that is as good as at talking in press conferences, stirring up controversy, creating excitement before a fight. Like guys like him, guys like Ryan Garcia, Gervonta Davis, or Adrian Bronner, really. So I'm thinking of Adrian Bronner. Those type of guys have the type of charisma and the type of personality that make people want to watch them and want to make people want to watch their fights. And then when they get in the ring, specifically Keith Thurman, when he gets in the ring and he's really on his game, you get a really, really exciting show. So I'm excited that he's back. I think it is a great, great deal for boxing. The fight was not televised, obviously, in the United States. I do believe at 8:00 they're going to show the replay. So what I've seen is the highlights and all the stuff. So after this, we're going to go back and watch the full 3 rounds. But they showed enough of the highlights and enough of the angles to see what Keith Thurman looked like. And Keith Thurman was just way, 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 way too much for that guy. So when the fight was over, though, Keith Thurman called out Tim Tszyu. Now, if you're not familiar with Tim Tszyu is the former WBO 154-pound champion who lost his title to Sebastian Fundora. When he lost to Sebastian Fundora, people were like, really didn't. I thought that he was going to beat Sebastian Fundora if he had not had that really bad cut over his head and all the bleeding and all the stuff that came through. And then I think Tim Tszyu was supposed to fight Virgil Ortiz. I do believe that was the guy he was supposed to fight next, but then he had to pull out of the fight because the scar from the tissue on his head kept, it didn't heal all the way. So, he wasn't able to fight in his last fight. However, Tim Tszyu is still a legitimately very, very big live dog in a fight with anybody that he has. And hopefully these guys can get it done and they can have that fight that they had intended on having. Now, if Keith Thurman is able to beat Tim Tszyu, right, and he's able to do Tim Tszyu and get past Tim Tszyu, then I think we're going to hopefully get the fight that I really want to see out of Keith Thurman. I really want to see Keith Thurman fight Errol Spence Jr. At this point in time in their career, I think it's a match made in heaven. Errol had his injuries, had his problems. Keith Thurman had his injuries, his problems. Errol's had his time away from the ring. Keith has had his time away from the ring. If Keith can get his hand on a 154-pound title, and Errol comes back at 154 pounds, that is a perfect matchup to make, man. I'm not one of these guys that believe that we should, just because a fight didn't happen when it would have been at its absolute peak to happen. In the case of Errol Spence and Keith Thurman, that would have been while Keith Thurman was the WBA and the WBC champion, and Errol Spence was the IBF champion at 147. That would have been the perfect time to have that fight. However, can't cry over spilled milk. Not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Both these guys are still there. They're both around the same, stages in their career. Both former unified champions. Both only have one loss. I believe Keith Thurman has one loss. Errol Spence has one loss. So perfect situation. Now, obviously, the hold up to that fight is going to be whether or not Errol Spence Jr. is willing to forgive and forget and move on from the fact that Keith Thurman, at least in the opinion of Errol Spence Jr., led him around by the nose and refused to fight him. So once Errol got his money up and Errol was the man, Errol said, nah, I'm not trying to fight Keith Thurman. I'll never fight Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman didn't want to fight me when the fight should have happened. So Errol Spence Jr. held a grudge against him. But in this scenario, hopefully, Errol Spence Jr. will change his mind. Keith Thurman can get past Tim Tszyu if that's the next fight that they're going to have, because I do believe that probably is the fight that he's going to have next is Tim Tszyu. But if he can get past him, that's the perfect fight for Keith Thurman. That's the fight for Errol Spence Jr., and that's going to be the biggest fight in 154 pounds for sure. Terrence Crawford has already left the weight division to try to go up to 168 pounds and fight Canelo Alvarez in a fight that I have to say, man, I'm looking forward to. I don't have a problem with that fight at all. I'm glad Canelo's fighting Terrence Crawford. Obviously, I would have rather had Canelo Alvarez fight David Benavidez. But, hey, man, that's just not in the makings. Canelo Alvarez is going to fight a small guy coming up from several weight classes. And Terrence Crawford is going to move up and try to say, hey, man, I can carry this weight all the way to 168. And then try to, get his names in the annals of history. Even though I have to tell you that a lot of times that's not how that works. People will forget you right after you do it. Trust me. They'll be there. Oh, yes, I skipped up this other division. And bro, trust me. 2 years after that happens, people ain't even going to be acting like it happened. Look at what look at Roy Jones and that heavyweight division, right? Roy Jones Jr. went up to that heavyweight division, came back and got knocked out by, beat and then knocked out by Antonio Tarver. And then all of a sudden, his legacy ain't what it used to be. So we'll see if Terrence Crawford stays up there. But if Terrence Crawford gets treated like Jermell got treated by Canelo, moving that far up, I don't think you'll see Bud end his career at 168. He may come back down, and who knows? We may get a last hurrah from these guys that all pretty much came in the ring around the same time. Or at least Keith Thurman and Terrence Crawford, even though I think Terrence is a little bit older than Keith. Anyway, that's my take on the matter. Please let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Deuces.